Namaste, everyone. This is my third interview with Gurudev Amrit Desai, Yogi Amrit Desai. Wonderful to be back here in the studio.
Thank you, Rajiv. It's always so great to be with you. Who is bringing new insights into the world, like that are often people are missing as to what is going on between person and person, between civilization and another.
That's good. So I just to let people know who are joining us. I've had two previous interviews this week with Gurudev Yogi Amrit Desai, who is the pioneer bringing yoga, traditional yoga from India to the United States in 1960, so 56 years ago. And we talked about the whole story, how it began, and what all he did, and what is distinct about his yoga system based on his guru lineage compared to the normal physical postures that people do. And then we talked about how yoga has transformed in America for better, worse, in different ways. We talked about the U-turn theory, how a civilization and culture can get digested into something else and transformed for better or worse. We talked about all those things. So today I wanted to discuss the state of United States culturally. Reminds me of the 60s in the sense that there is a confusion and need for a cultural revolution. The 60s, when you came, was the era of this counterculture. So the reason for the counterculture is because the old culture failed. The old culture collapsed. And there were a lot of challenges to it, and the youth wanted to rebel. So they were looking for answers, and many of them went to LSD, and many of them went to India. So those who wanted to go to yoga got you, and those who wanted to go to LSD got something else. So there were different ways of rebelling. Some of the people just rebelling against what the parents' culture was. Now there is something called the American myth, which is the set of stories, some true, some false, some exaggerated, about who we are, the collective we. Like the individual ego has his myth and stories about me, that
And my
past, my history, and what I do, and how great I am, or what my problems are, and I'm no good, or whatever. So the collective we have developed these stories in every group. And within the Americans, there are subgroups and subgroups like that. So there is this American narrative, the American myth, which has a name. Americans have given a name, and it's called American exceptionalism. And this is the notion of we are the exceptional people of the world. And this was created during the encounter with the Native Americans, way back hundreds of years ago. So this idea that we are exceptional people, and there were many rationalizations why we are exceptional, in what way we're exceptional, we're entitled to taking over others. And then the conquest of Mexico to capture California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. These were not part of the United States. So all this expansionism. So there's a part of this American exceptionalism myth. So this myth,
And it started with England.
it started in England. So this came to the United States and mutated into a different kind of myth. It became kind of American myth, while the British had their own myth. So this myth often falls apart when it no longer, like the ego, goes into depression when it doesn't work.
Right.
When the myth crashes, it's like a computer crashing. When the myth crashes because it's no longer able to work, no longer able to deliver, and then it crashes. So similarly, the collective myth of American exceptionalism sometimes crashes. And so this happened because of the Vietnam War in the 60s. There were many things going on. There was a Watergate crisis. So there was a crisis of whether you can trust the president of the United States because Nixon was there. So all sorts of things put together created a crisis of American myth. So I
And
feel
it is, I think, showing up
so it's
in
happening.
individuals.
Yes,
How many young people are becoming victim of the drugs,
yes,
alcohol,
yes,
and getting depressed
right,
and feeling victim of anxiety,
yes,
and suicide rate going up,
yes,
and people are becoming more and more attention deficient.
yes.
Disorder is coming up.
All these problems are there. So I feel that right now, in 2016, we are witnessing another crisis of myth of the American. So what happens is when there's a crisis of myth, people go looking for answers, and then based on what they get from here and there, they reconstitute the myth. So the myth goes back. So after the 60s crisis, in the 70s and 80s, it started building back. And then with the fall of communism in the 90s, the American myth of exceptionalism was full swing. We are now the only superpower left. And so this business was in full swing again. Now it has collapsed again. And this is a crisis. So last time, India played a role, yoga played a role in bringing about the counterculture. Can it play a role again? That's what I want to ask. Mm. Is there a 60s revival, again, a return to the 60s happening now? Where in the 60s, the yoga brought, vegetarianism, brought meditation, brought all kinds of new ideas.
And ancient teachings from India came to the West.
Yes.
And infiltrated into psychology,
yes.
education, culture, everywhere.
Health, the whole health healing system. So that's the result of a benefit of the crisis of myth, because when you have a crisis of myth, then you go looking for radically new answers.
Right.
Yeah. So actually the depressed person could turn to yoga.
Exactly.
Yeah, he could turn.
That's how it happens.
Yeah, he could turn to.
So hardly anybody goes through transformation
without crisis.
Without the crisis.
Yeah. So now the discussion I want to have today is that if we are in another myth, crisis of myth, American myth, because there is this clash with Islam going on, there is this fight with China because they're taking over jobs. Industry, money, they're going to have more money and jobs and technology. So on the material, on the religious level, we have a conflict with Islam. They are a confrontation where they're challenging the religious foundation of this country. On the material level of prosperity, secular material level of prosperity, the atheist part of our consciousness in this country, the purely mechanical, materialistic, what's good for us in a very practical way, that is being challenged by China. Yeah. So then there are drugs, there are more crimes, there are all kinds of human rights issues in this country. The race violence is erupting again, in some of these cities. So we have all kind of crises going on. So the thing is, like India could help, the tradition, the Vedic culture could help bring some value. What are some of the ideas? Because you are the only person with the 60s memory firsthand that we have access to now.
Right.
And to figure out what did you learn from the 60s that is applicable now? What are the things we should do and what are the things we should not do? Because we also learned some of the things that didn't go right.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that?
So when I came in 1960 in America, there was only one health food store in whole of Philadelphia and one gym called Gold's Gym. In other words, there was no health consciousness. There was no, it was missing. And most people do not know that health is a precursor to spirituality. It comes before spirituality comes. At that time, wherever I went, in the bus or in the temple or in the cinema hall, everywhere people were smoking. Now you can see people have stopped smoking almost everywhere. There are health foods everywhere, and there is all kinds of health-related changes are coming in the form of exercise and now yoga. So yoga brings a completely different message than the health-oriented changes have come to America, but which are the foundation. If you don't have a foundation of health search, you will never go to the spirituality, because health is where all the crises show up. Inner balance, where high crises show up. Balance that is disturbed by the emotions, fear, self-concepts. All those myths, they are built into the larger society as well. And that is what gets challenged. So I think the challenges have started, and I have seen it grow all along the way. Now, as the challenges are faced and changes are happening, more and more health-related issues, people are seeing medical system is not really working as well as we thought. So everything in the education system is changing. Business techniques are changing. So I see changes everywhere in reference to changing consciousness. But along with it, the opposite is also seen more clearly. So I think we are at the stage of amazing unfoldment of consciousness. That is why yoga has it has become so popular that it's in a business field, in the education field, in the health field, everywhere yoga has entered. So
yeah.
But the yoga is again seen as physical discipline. So that is where I see yoga can be a very unique contribution in this unfolding consciousness where United States is going through. Both are happening parallel.
So do you think that the crisis of myth happening could also be a blessing in disguise, in the sense it's an opportunity to bring more yoga in and say the other method didn't work? So now we're talking about the industrial military complex, too much materialism, the whole system of rat race.
What I say is, if you win a rat race, you are still a rat.
Right, right.
This is what is going on.
Yeah. So is it? Do you feel that this will help yoga actually make a bigger dent? Because more people will come to ashrams saying that the life out there isn't all that great. And do you feel that the method for which now the other thing I want to discuss is I want to ask you this: the Christian missionaries have gone and, in the name of helping society deal with poverty and problems, they're trying to convert. Yesterday they made Mother Teresa Saint Teresa in the church in Vatican, so it was a big, huge event. But a lot of people in Calcutta complained. They said that she actually made fame and name and money and all that on the poverty, exploiting them, and didn't do as much work as they said she did, but it was more a propaganda to get herself known. But be that as it may, the missionary approach has been to take problems of poor people and material problems and try to help them and make create that as their value added brand name. Do you feel that in this country there is actually a need for yoga and Indian spirituality to help people with drug addiction, prison? There's a huge prison population, the largest prison population in the world, race violence, blacks and whites, unwed mothers, abortions going on, all of this, all the crises that are happening in this country of human rights. They could be even considered as human rights problems. You've thought of them as health problems. Do you feel that, like the missionaries are helping in some way, this could be the yogi project? The yoga is here to actually, it's not just in your private life to get you some experience, but actually it's going to help society in a very practical way.
Right. This yoga has done an amazing changes in the Western world. And I have seen that. That was my intention. When I was there in 1960, there were so many young people who were rebellious against the conventional values. They came to me, and I showed them, and I cut their hair. I showed them how to live a simple, basic life to bring health back, and how to understand their revolution. They knew what they didn't want, but they didn't know what they wanted. Because when you get rid of what you don't want, you create a space to invite something new.
Right.
But they didn't have anything new.
Right.
They were going through reformation,
yes.
not transformation.
Some would
so
go to
that's
LSD.
what I
Yes,
taught
yes.
to large number of people who came to my class, to the 3 different ashrams I had in America. The largest number of people came to me. And this is precisely what I provided them, is how to bring this inner revolution and transformation where they would go through the major shift from what they were already fed up and rebellious against, how to go to the real values that can come from global peace, global harmony, but not making it happen globally, but individually to globally.
Yes. So, but you see what happened is Many people transformed through yoga and dharma and spirituality in the 60s and 70s now are on Wall Street making billions of dollars, very materialistic, and back in the rat race. Many U-turned and went back into the rat race. So a lot of people I meet living in New Jersey, I meet a lot of Wall Street people who tell me they're my age and they say, oh yeah, when I was in my 20s, I was also into all the things. I was a hippie and I went to India and I did this and I had this guru and they have pictures and all that. So, but that was not sustainable for a lot of people.
Right.
A revolving door.
Why? Because they will rebellious against the conventional lifestyle and conventional traditions. So they did not know what they wanted. This is what happens for people when they go through midlife crisis. They do not know that they are seeking love and happiness from the marriage and children and family life and a work life. They change, then next different husband, different work, different job, and they try to solve the problem. I call it reformation. So I taught these people who came to me, I showed them how to transform yourself. So on a global level, this is what we are talking about, that these changes are happening in the world, how to change it at an individual level to global level. So one person changes, it's not one person change, he affects everybody who comes in touch with him. So it is my approach is how to create the global change, social change, national change, cultural change through introducing yoga system that teaches them how to transform their cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, national conditioning, racial conditioning, to go into the freedom of no conditions,
So,
the freedom of the soul.
but today if you look at the world as it is, not how we want it or wishful thinking, but just literally, honestly looking at, withdrawing, witnessing, and without judgment saying this is how things are. There are three very big super egos, collective identity egos clashing with each other. There is the West led by the United States, there is Islam, and there is China. Each of them claim that they are the best and they want to take over the others. Islam has a mandate from God that they have to take over. I mean, at least the Wahhabi school has. And so they are the cutting edge of fighting for Islam, thinking that that's their job. The China has not based on religion and not based on a God mandate, but they have a belief that they are going to be the number one country in the world. And when that as they keep advancing, which they are rapidly, it's at the expense of the United States. And the United States has its myth of American exceptionalism, which says we are the exceptional people in the world. So we're not going to put up with this Islam intrusion into us or the China intrusion into us. So we got our own superego, our own collective ego. So we have three collective egos. It has never before been in history that there are three kind of like superpowers and empires competing, because there was always there was a Roman Empire, but nobody else around. And then there was, the Ottoman Empire, but nobody really taking them on successfully. But now there's three huge global egos, collective egos, of such a large amount of weaponry and so much kind of power and number of people, billions in their control, that this is a very dangerous game. Can individuals take on all this? If you have a bottom-up only, that we'll make one individual, he'll wake up, he'll get pranic awakening, he'll be nice. That we did in the 60s, but a lot of that, all those people got digested, U-turn, they got back into the American myth which had been broken but put together again, and we rose up against the Soviet Union in this Cold War, and we said, okay, we are the number one again.
We are back in the same cycle.
We're back in the same cycle. So we domesticated the yoga, we domesticated the yogis and made them into safe, no longer a threat to the establishment. They were all counterculture, wanted to overthrow the establishment. They didn't do that. They ended up joining the establishment. Most of them employees of the establishment, because they're so powerful. So we have to now think strategically what to do about dismantling the very big myths, the very big superegos, the three I talked about.
Right.
And I don't think it can be done from the outside. It can be done only within the system. The people who are within the Islam can break down Islam. The people who are within China can break down China. And the people who are within the United States who are yogis can break down that American exceptionalism myth. So isn't there a need, isn't there a message to the yogis, the American yogis, that you have a job to dismantle this huge myth of collective ego that you are part of? Do you feel that is also a yogi's job?
That is yogi's job, but for the collective ego, collective dysfunctional social, cultural manifestations, that can be changed by the law, by military, by the punishment, by the fear. So, but that cannot be changed by the yogi. So what can yogi do that will magically change any of it?
Okay,
so it must go from person to person, individual to individual. And somebody like Modi ji, who is Prime Minister of India, he is also yogi. So he's making some of the changes at the large scale in the world through bringing yoga to the world. So that is what I have been doing in my own way since 1960. How to bring yoga consciousness that creates the revolution that you are asking to create on a global level and 3 major power level.
Right.
It must, to me, that is the best way that I know of.
So Maharishi had an idea, and I want your opinion on it. He said that if there is a town with 100 population, square root of 100 is 10. So if 10 people are meditating all the time, it will change the consciousness and bring peace to the whole town of 100.
I believe in it.
He believed that. He said if there are 10,000 people, population, square root of 10,000 is 100. So you need 100 meditators. If there are 100 meditators, it will bring peace. So you take the population of a city, square root it, and that many meditators you need. Now there's a book they published where they did this experiment in 5 or 6 cities during war. There was a crisis in the Middle East, there was a crisis somewhere, and they did one in Washington. They announced, so that you can verify these claims, they announced that from this date to that date, we are going to have so many thousands meditators moving into this city, and we are going to camp out, and we are going to meditate to bring peace. And then they compared the statistics of violence and crime before and after, and they're able to show a substantial drop in crime. So
that I believe in.
So they have published a book like this. I think this book was out several years ago.
I have read that. I have not read the whole book.
So for 10 billion people, which is more than the current population, it'll take 100,000, because 100,000 times 100,000 will be 10 billion. So this is the Maharishi plan to bring world peace. So basically he says it's not just one at a time. If 2 people are meditating together, it has more influence than the 2 of them meditating separately. If a group is meditating together in a sangha, it has a collective coherence in the consciousness, in the collective consciousness. So his idea was that to bring about transformation on a group level, we need to create these large meditation centers in all these places. And you would need a total of 100,000 at any point in time, 24/7, who are meditating.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think of this kind of, it's a very revolutionary
No, I
idea.
actually believe in that, but that also happens on an individual level who chooses to be part of the collective meditation.